Hey everyone, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc, and welcome to another show of Identity 3, which is a podcast all about digital identity and Web3. It's my great pleasure today to be joined by Dawood Jacobs. Dawood is very interesting, really unusual background, which we look forward to getting into, but he is the co-founder and CEO of DAL Identity International. Welcome, Dawood. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Nice meeting you and excellent joining you.
Likewise. And just for context as well, Dawood, we don't really know each other, and I actually came to know of you by seeing you on LinkedIn and commenting a lot in different threads about identity, which of course I'm kind of really interested in as well. And I figured that there was a lot of questions I had about the technology that you're working on, your company's building out. And I thought rather than setting up a call with Dawood, me just having that privately and then trying to think about how do I share that, I thought the best thing to do is actually just to have you onto the podcast to talk about it. So I really do appreciate you making the time today. So
Absolutely.
To kick things off, oh, fantastic. Our pleasure. Could you please introduce both yourself, Dawood, and then also your company, DAL, for me, please?
Absolutely. I'm a ex-police officer from South Africa many years ago. I was trained as a forensic investigator, fingerprint expert. That's basically my core from where I came into the identity space. I've always looked at the identity for the last 30 years as very, very unique and very special to every person. And that's basically the only thing that you own. You don't own anything more than that. Currently, I'm the CEO of a company that's based in Florida, USA. Company's name is DAL Identity International. The DAL stands for Diverse Authentication Library. So everything that we do, it's diverse. So we use a lot of different biometrics. We've got access to various tools and that in the library to protect it and to verify the person's identity, obviously using forensic protocol as well.
Very good. And I said at the start in the kind of opening segment where you have a very, certainly for this show at least, normally when we speak to people, Dawood, they have really interesting backgrounds, but they're often very, they've often been in software or that kind of space, but you're coming actually from the forensic world as a crime scene investigator and a fingerprint expert, which you did for 12 years. So I'd be really interested, just from a kind of personal interest, could you describe a typical day for you as a crime scene investigator?
Yeah, obviously it starts where you given a couple of cases that happened overnight or the previous day. So you're entrusted with the crucial task of conducting an on-site investigation. So you go to the crime scene, you obviously start combing the scene for any latent prints, DNA, or any other physical evidence that's there left by the perpetrator on the site. So every piece of information that is data, that is evidence value, is collected, and it is obviously, because of the value of it, it has to be collected, and the full chain of custody has to be activated from where you collect that. So that is then collected. All of the data, evidence, whatever you've collected is taken back to where your office is, where it's then entrusted into the evidence locker. So all of that is basically in the day that you need to go to a crime scene, investigate it thoroughly, and then on the day that you need to provide evidence in court, you've got to go to court and testify as to what you collected, how you collected it, and when from where. So that's about the typical thing. It's a lot more than that, obviously, but that's a short version of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And can you take us through, like, from the analysis aspect? So you talked about kind of collecting fingerprints from the scene, and then taking them back to kind of analyzing in the lab. What does that entail? What does that analysis look like in practical terms, Dawood?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the crime scene. When you collect it, you need to firstly know what you're looking for on a crime scene. That's where you've got to have a proficiency in the crime scene. You've got to know what a potential person that committed the crime would have done there. So you collect the evidence using different tools. You can make a latent fingerprint visible using powders or reagents. reagents, and you can actually then lift it or photograph it. Back at the crime scene lab, it's taken into custody and it's processed. If it was a fingerprint that you lifted from a crime scene, obviously it has to be photographed to the right size and all that. And that's fed currently into the ABIS or AFIS systems that's there to see if they can match a potential match between what you found in the crime scene and what is on record on the AFIS. Once the AFIS has kicked up a potential match, that is going to be verified by the fingerprint expert, because obviously fingerprints is very unique with the ridges and all the endings and patterns of the fingerprint. So a match is done, and only when you're sure that it's 100% match of that, the two fingerprints, you can actually then start looking for the perpetrator, arresting that person, taking them to court. So there's various different ways of looking at how the lab works with the fingerprints. It's basically that you have to have a fingerprint that has got enough minutiae on it to provide evidence that can sustain a potential conviction of a criminal.
Got it. And is the analysis part, David, is it purely about linking that fingerprint to a person, and or is it also about, you could tell other things from maybe the way the print, if hand imprint was kind of smudged or moved a certain way? Is the analysis also about understanding what happened, not just who it was at the scene, but it's also can maybe tell you a story about actually what happened at the scene as well?
Yeah, obviously, if you see that the hands are going through a window and it's pointing downwards, somebody climbed through the window. If they touch something quickly, you'll see a smudge. It might not even get any fingerprint ridges that's worth taking to the ABIS. But yeah, it does tell you sometimes about what happened on the crime scene. A natural thing with everybody on a crime scene is that you're sweating because of obviously the adrenaline that's pumping through you and all that. So sometimes you'll get a fingerprint that's totally smudged because of the sweat pouring out the person's fingerprints. So there's a lot of stuff like that that indicates to you what happened there.
Got it. Yes, fascinating. Could you actually talk a little bit about maybe a complex case or a case that just sticks in your head that you worked on during your time with doing fingerprint analysis?
Yeah, there's a lot of cases, as I explained earlier. There's obviously those that I don't want to discuss, but I'll tell you about one that actually stuck to my head as to how dumb a criminal can be. So I went to this specific crime scene, and the criminal went through the kitchen doors. So the kitchen door was one of those that's got these little small windows inside the frame. And what he did is he actually took out one of those frames, or one of those glasses out of the frame, and he threw it away. So I came to the scene, went through the whole place, couldn't find any fingerprints in there, but I was looking for this piece of glass. So what the guy did was he actually threw it into the swimming pool. Through my investigation and looking at everything, I found the piece of glass, small piece of glass. I found it in the swimming pool. I took it out and just let it dry. And he left me all 10 of his fingerprints. So and it's not just on the outside of the glass, it was on both sides. So he's the only person that could have left it, and that placed him at that specific crime scene at a specific time. The time would have been obviously not specific, but between a couple of hours. And that's when the housebreaking took place. It was very funny because I actually identified the guy from that piece of glass, I think about 5 minutes into the office. So it was just stupidity on his side.
It was a real gift for you, it sounds like.
Absolute gift. It was to be honest, it was the easiest matching that I ever did in my life regarding that.
Nice. Yeah, fantastic. And what do films get? Like, obviously, like, I think we all probably have some thought or notion that we understand what a job like yours could entail because we watch like CSI and all these crime dramas and stuff. But those are just films, of course. I'm sure there's quite a lot of exaggerations and things that are not practical. Like, what was the biggest bugbear that you have, David, about what films get wrong about forensics?
I think that many of the new movies and series like CSI actually gives us gives the police and the crime scene guys a lot of ideas as to how to address some of the crime scenes, because they've got novel ideas, you understand that. But the one thing that I always say, and I've seen it a couple of times, is where somebody takes a fingerprint from a place and then they use it to create another fingerprint that they then use to access something. Now, this is I think, one of the biggest overrating things that they actually promote or say to the people. Firstly, it's not that easy to steal somebody's fingerprints. You need to know what a fingerprint is, how to lift it, to who that fingerprint belongs. Then you need to know, when you've lifted the fingerprint, how to create a dummy of that and where you're going to use it. Because now you've got to know who the person is, you've got to know fingerprints, you've got to know how to lift it, how to manipulate it into a form of a dummy, and then where do you use it. So all of that is the stuff that I think is probably, for me personally, a lot of nonsense. And there's one thing that all of them are actually missing. When you sweat through your fingerprints. So your fingerprints has got pores on that, on each ridge and between the ridges and that. Now these pores are also a way of identification for a person. It's called poroscopy. So very few people actually know this. So if you're using a rubber dummy made from whatever and it doesn't sweat, it means it's not a live person. That's just as it is. So yeah, I think that
Interesting.
they do show us a lot of good stuff, but this I don't like. I don't.
Yeah.
Let's put it like this. I don't agree with what they showing to the people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I always thought you kind of like when your hands are sweating, you always thought it was when you talk about sweaty palms and stuff like that. But it's interesting. It also comes out through your, your fingerprints and things as well. So that's something I definitely wasn't aware of. So every day is a school day. So moving more back into kind of topical stuff for this podcast. So moving quickly from sweaty palms into digital identity management was often quite a difficult segue. Can you tell us how you got into ID management from your kind of background of forensics, David?
Yeah, I've always been accustomed to an identity, and as I've progressed through the years, I always believe that you're either 100% one person or 0% somebody else. That's the bottom line. And through what I've learned and cases that I've done, I always treated an identity as a record, because this is a record of the existence of a single real world human being. You can have all the GDPRs and all that stuff in place, but if you do not treat an identity as a record, and you can actually have ISO standards for records management that you can pull into this, and very few people actually do this. Very, very few identity verification systems does this. So I've followed a lot of what's happening in the digital space. I've researched a lot of the evolution of the physical identity into the digital space. Um, and due to my knowledge in forensics, records management, and all of that, I started looking more into how to ensure that the digital identity that you are talking about, or the capturing of forensic, let's put it, fingerprints and that, has to be true to that person. Um, and in essence, I just went from physical identity management into digital identity management as it evolved.
Yeah, fantastic. And you may have touched on some of these points already, David, but how does your experience, like as the forensic kind of crime scene investigator, impact the work you're doing now? You kind of already touched on one of the points there about, knowing that that's that specific individual. Are there other aspects of your past experience that really help you and impact on the work that you do now?
Yeah, I've always trusted fingerprints. That's the most important part for me. I've worked and I've seen millions of fingerprints up close as I've classified them, I've searched for them, so I know a bit about fingerprints. I've never seen two fingerprints that match each other than that on the same person. So that's very important. So the uniqueness for me on a fingerprint is that millions of fingerprints that I've seen, none of them was the same, exactly the same. Um, Instead, in the case where, like I just mentioned, where it's the same person, obviously that will be the same. So that's something that was very important for me, bringing it from that crime scene and fingerprint expert into the identity management space. As I've always respected the identity of the human being as being one and true, this also added into that I can ensure that the identity that I'm working with is a single existing real world human being. There's not two of you. There might be two identical twins, but they always will differ with their fingerprints. Their DNA might be the same, but their fingerprints will always differ. So that's the part that I have, and the fact that I can use fingerprints to prove or disprove an identity in the highest court of law anywhere in the world. That is something that is very important in how I brought it into identity management space.
Yeah, really interesting. And a topic I see you write a little bit about on LinkedIn, Dawood, is our synthetic identities. Could you, first of all, quickly define what they are, and then the challenges that they present to us to, I guess, preserve the integrity of online identity?
Yes, our synthetic identities is the fastest growing identity related problem globally. It's not just a thing that um, has been created just now. It's coming a while back already. I'm talking in the digital space. I'm not talking about person acting as somebody else in the real world. So it is something that's created digitally. It doesn't represent a real world human being. It is not something that can eat, drink, or walk on the planet Earth. So it does not exist as a real world human being. The problem is that the crime syndicates have seen the ease of infiltrating any system using synthetic identities because the preventative tools that's in place does not work or is not sufficiently up to par to what's happening. Most probably the synthetic identities is the biggest issue for every person and every institution globally. I'm talking about banks, hospital, governments, anything, because they can manipulate you voting. That's something that they can do. They can infiltrate the bank and at a certain stage destroy the bank within a day or two. And the most important part about it is that the crime syndicates has also seen that the honeypots doesn't reside in the single human being. It resides in the bigger institutions like the banks. Why do you want to steal one person's purse for $500 when you can take a bank for $500 billion? So it's a huge difference between where it's going. And it's already active. There has been already big Sybil-like attacks on fintech banks, and most probably have destroyed those. And then the further thing about synthetic identities, I would say, is the fact that AI, artificial intelligence, might be able or could be able to create synthetic identities on their own. Now, this is a real scary part about how I see synthetic identities and where it can actually go.
Yes, and obviously, I mean, Francisco and I were talking just before you came on, Dawood, and obviously there was news of the kind of AI or kind of deep fake, synthetic identity attack that happened this week. I think $25 million was stolen. So it seems kind of particularly timely, although I'm sure there's been plenty more of those in the past. How do we solve these challenges, David?
I think I know that the first thing that every institution must do is to start acknowledging the real world human being. And that is the only owner of an identity in the world, not a digital thing. The only way to actually ensure that there's no synthetic identities on a system is to ensure that you're actually onboarding the person in front of somebody else onto a system that has got forensic protocol included in it. So I'm selling Dell as well here now. But the main thing is, if you do not do that and you disregard the human being, you're going to be in big trouble. Not now, maybe not next month, maybe in 2 to 3 years. And remember this, you are always first a human being before you're anything digital.
And I guess this kind of links into this question is, what is forensic identity management? So I think you were starting to touch on it there, Dawood, where it's potentially an individual going to some form of machine, which we can talk about what that is. And then there's maybe an operator that's also there and using the output of that process to then go into a system to then enable that identity to be, I guess, secure and known. Do I understand that correctly? And then maybe you can talk a little bit about what DEL is doing and how you're using identity management.
Yeah, you just mentioned it. It's important to be onboarded on one device. I'm not talking about one device that incorporates all the different biometrics. You need to onboard onto a device that incorporates the different biometrics. So the most important biometric that you need is fingerprints, and not just one fingerprint, all 10, or what is available. You have to capture irises, because irises, according to me, is one of the most or the best biometric, apart from obviously fingerprints and DNA. And then the face has also got to be captured, but it's got to be captured in one instance. Because if you take a picture there of a person, you take his fingerprints there, it's not going to link into each other. So it's got to be on one device. Now, the forensic protocol that's important is you've got to onboard at a place where somebody else opens up this process, so that you know who's onboarding this person. And that is important, because anything, and I actually wanted to add that to when I spoke about crime scenes. When you collect the evidence, that's the start of chain of custody. So you need to lift it, sign that you lifted there and what time and date, and you've got to have somebody that signatures that they saw you do it there and then. And that's exactly the same protocol. So if you do that with the start at the forensic protocol, you will not have any synthetic identities in the system, because this is a real world human being. So that's basically how I've combined the forensic aspect into identity management.
Yeah, and on the website, for kind of looking, just doing some research before the show, Dawood, on your website, you say that selfie with liveness verification is more risky than forensic identity management. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, the thing that a selfie doesn't have, this is very important, it's got no forensic value. So this means that you can't take that to a court of law to prove or disprove an identity. And that's one of the first problems. With the evolution, and you just mentioned that deepfake situation that occurred in the week. This is just the starting point of that, where you will have deepfake synthetic identities at such a good quality that you can't distinguish between a real world person and a fake or a synthetic. And that is the one of the biggest problems. I also mentioned that crime syndicates uses selfies actually to infiltrate a bank. So if a bank is using selfie with liveness, it all sounds very good and well. I really like that, but it's all digital. There's no contact between the person and the identity verification solution. So you can see for yourself, taking a picture of a person's face and linking it to some other credential, driver's license, ID card, is already compromising what that there's no proof of that person actually existing. And again, as I mentioned with AI, the selfie stuff is going to become even more prevalent, and it's happening. It's not just what I'm saying; it's what's happening. That's important. That's where the problem lies with selfies. With the identity systems using forensic protocol, you will always know that that person onboarded once as a real world human being. They can't change their fingerprints, and their face and irises is linked to them. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. It does very much so. And I think one thing I'm thinking about when you're talking through that, Dawood, is what really becomes key in this solution. There's a couple of things I'm thinking about. Well, one is it's how you're getting, so you're putting that identity, fingerprints, iris scans into the system. A really key part is how do you get this stuff into the system? So we have a kind of individual and operator, and an individual is going to a machine, or I think you call it a kiosk. I think the identity is, I think the kind of naming that you've got for that. And so I think a key part of this is going that people will wonder is, how secure is that process? So can you talk a little bit about identity and how that works, and how do you ensure like that the integrity of that machine is in place, so that maybe it's not losing data or data is being filtered out somewhere else during that process? Like, what kind of steps have you taken to mitigate against some of those risks?
So what we've put in place is, obviously, let's talk about the whole forensics part. It's captured correctly and all that, and then we use forensic cryptography provenance. So it means every piece of data that we collect can only be sent in one way to the system, to our, let's start at the ABIS. So all of that data is sent using cryptography and international standard cryptography as well for fingerprints and all of that. So the data is sent with that specific trail so that we can prove that that data collected at that kiosk or identity kiosk was sent to the ABIS with all the date stamps and everything in place. So the integrity of that part is very profound for us. We also use Web4. I know that you saw that we previously did use blockchain, but we've moved away completely from blockchain. But the whole thing is secure, it's speed, and it's accurate. That's what we're all about with that. So data cannot just be exported to anything else. It can only move from there right to one single place.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, because every time I ask a question, you get a really another interesting bit I want to know about. So, kind of the question I was like moving away from blockchain, and maybe I could wrap that into the kind of notion of Web4. So, maybe you could explain why you moved away from blockchain, Dawood, and then also the phrasing of Web4. It seems like there's Web3. Jack Dorsey uses Web5. I've heard people at conferences using Web7. I think I've even heard of a Web13. So it's a very co-opted term, but could you explain why you moved away from blockchain first of all, and then also what is the thinking behind Web4, please?
With the blockchain, and we looked into, or we started initially with the blockchain NFTs and all that, to understand that we need to have the security at the optimized level. The problem is we found security vulnerabilities and reliability issues with blockchain. If you can think about it, despite its initial promise of as an immutable ledger, recent developments have revealed weaknesses, accessibility, or potential hacking that could take place. And all of these vulnerabilities can be exploited by criminal syndicates. So that's the one of the part. Manipulated transaction records occurs, compromised data integrity. So we looked into all of this, and then we decided, listen, yeah, we not decided, our CTO, Marcel Dongers, actually developed a solution or a platform which he called WODA, Write Once, Distribute Anywhere. So we started looking into that and how we can utilize it. So the GitHub repository covers the full entire history of it. It's basically a technology paradigm shift from standalone manufactured products to specialized microservices that meet specific socioeconomic and environmental needs. So that's basically the Web4. It doesn't have the Web2 and Web3's protocols, so we're going right into the object that is created or from there. So the object becomes the method that we utilize in this. We don't have all those protocols like in the previous two webs. And it's actually what we found was perfect for our identity management on forensic-based protocols. The functionality basically translates into one-touch scenario in which a person can share their identity and their data across devices, browsers, and even operating systems. So it's bringing interoperability to the Dell system that would never have existed with the blockchain.
And you mentioned that's in GitHub. So is that something that is all the source code then also open source for Wado, or is that something that's happening or you intend to happen then, Dawood, as well, or is that something that would be proprietary?
It's got open source, obviously part of that. So I think the link is on the Web4 part that we on our website, so that the people can visit the GitHub and see what's going on. We're the only identity management system on that platform. So
okay.
Our security and speed and accuracy, as I mentioned, has escalated to something that's not seen anywhere in any system at the moment.
Interesting. Yeah. And just out of interest, what was the blockchain that we were using? Obviously, some are more secure than others. What was the one that you were specifically working with?
I'm not sure. I think that
it's okay if you don't remember. It's fine.
Remember, my technology aspect on that is is
Oh,
not
it's
into
fine.
that, but
Ah,
I can let Gunter or Marcel answer those questions for you easily.
oh, it's fine. Yeah, no, and it's just probably interesting. Like it's probably more just interesting to me, just because we're kind of involved in that space as well. So no problem at all.
Excellent.
Okay, that's really interesting. So in terms of so WorldCoin is the only thing that and excuse if that's an ignorant thing to say, David, but when I first became aware of what you were working on, and the immediate parallels that came into my head was with the similarities between you and WorldCoin, and that probably I don't know how you feel about that, but a lot of people are critical and have misgivings about WorldCoin, but there's some aspects that are similar to what you're describing. There's some that are different, of course, but one where someone's going to a machine. I think WorldCoin team call it an orb. I'm not sure if there's someone signing off that what they're capturing, but they're effectively capturing biometrics as well, and then using that as the entry point for data to be incorporated into a system. Um, so people have concerns about that. What's your take? Where do you see big differences between yourself and WorldCoin?
Yeah, absolutely. To put it short, I think that WorldCoin is a fake token system based on authenticated identities. Um, it's basically, for me personally, it's a ploy to drag people into centralized mechanisms or centralized mechanism for owning and storing their personal information. There's nothing secure or autonomous about it. Um, I've also, there's a lot of different parts of that. They're using the iris scan of a person. So it's not a digital twin which they are doing, and it's not necessarily a human being. As I mentioned, let me put it like this: fingerprints and DNA is the only two forensic acceptable biometrics, and then you can have dental as well. Um, our first part that we differ from them is that we create a digital twin of that person under their consent, 100% consent, with fingerprints as core, face and iris, and DNA if is optional as well. So, and it's self-owned by that individual, which doesn't happen in WorldCoin. You don't own that. It's something that's just placed into the system. Um, there's
Yeah.
no reference to an identity and managed or self-owned, which we do provide. It's a reference library of which we are the custodians, and the individual owns the information.
Yeah. I think the one thing I guess there is that I suppose there is a consent unless someone's being forced in front of one of the WorldCoin orbs to start that process. So I guess they have consent. You can assume if someone's taking part in that process, but I definitely accept the other points that you made and the differences there. One of the criticisms that I've heard, David, in relation to WorldCoin, well, one of many, is around the orbs themselves. And so there's some concerns about the machines, who makes them, how you can be trusting the what is actually happening inside the machine. I don't think the code is open source yet, or all of it's open source. Um, how do you handle those concerns as well? Like, I mean, suppose you could have the same concerns put towards yourself at DAL with regards to the identity kiosks that you have. How do you try and manage that situation, or how do you deal with that?
The person that's onboarded signs the consent, so it's explained to the person what they are providing for and how it's utilized. So we designed this whole system prior to GDPR or POPIA in South Africa and all that. So all 8 pillars that's involved in the GDPR, we already complied to that prior to even with our initial methodology phases. So the consent is also not signed on a piece of paper that we use the person's fingerprint. So the consent is given from the human being in front of that device with their fingerprints. So it's not just a photo of the face or something, it's real biometric, forensic biometrics that we utilize for that. And we do explain to the individual exactly what we do with it. We only take their identity, we place it in the library, we protect it for them, and only they can verify themselves against themselves. And that's what we do. We protect and secure in a different platforms, real identities, and that's the reason that we can provide this consent and this service.
Got it. And then do you kind of make any assurances then, like I was saying, with regards to um, how you secure that data, once you've captured it? Because like you said, like that's some of the most valuable data that someone can have. It's basically, I think you said yourself, is the only thing that you actually own, which is a really profound and powerful statement. I could definitely see us kind of using that in one of the clips or something. That was really interesting to hear, and obviously something that makes sense. Um, I mean, how do you think that that's a problem that you've been able to deal with? Like, because more inquisitive people, people that are technologists, people that are developers will probably want to know that level of information. Where could they go, maybe, David, to read a bit more about how you protect the data and make sure it's kept safe? And then also, how does the individual control that data once they have it? How do they reuse it in other places?
Okay, so I'm going to go, before I talk about the platforms, I'm going to talk about the Verified Trust Exchange. So we've created you can call it a super app on the Web4 WODA. It's called the Verified Trust Exchange. When you onboard onto the system, you automatically get this access to your own personalized Verified Trust Exchange. Your data is stored on that. You will be able to access it through your phone or any device. You can only open it with your biometrics. It's usually fingerprints that you capture with the camera and your face. Both of them open your Verified Trust Exchange. Your data resides in that space. So you have your identity part that you go to, your education, healthcare, financial, all of that. As many as what you want to add, you add onto the platform. You own and control that data. You can take the data and pass it to somebody else, and you monetize that data. So instead of using the credit bureaus at a certain stage, you will own your data and you will be able to pass it on to them. So the data that's on that in the VTE, apart from the identity parts, any other data that you add to your VTE is placed into the VTE, and only you can activate it using your biometrics. So if there's a letter from a church or whatever, for instance, and you say this letter has got this, or let's work on to a certificate. You've got a certificate, and the information on this certificate is true and accurate. You actually activate that document using your biometrics, and then you can send it out to somebody else. The fact that if you're sending something that's untruthful or fraudulent to somebody else, and they see that it's untrue, we have proof that you actually activated, so you were aware of the content in that document. So accountability is part of that. And with obviously the forensic cryptographic provenance from where it was created, sent to that, is always a one-way street. So the certificate was created at this institution. Directly from that device, it's sent into your personal VTE, and you have access to it, and you can obviously then pass it on. Which is it's basically a super app with a digital wallet at optimized levels, or on steroids, if you want to put it like that. It works with a real world human being, and that's the most important part. The different platforms, obviously, we have our own ABISes. We've got two ABISes, one for identity management for visitors and management of time and attendance. That's one part. Then we've got our larger biometric system that incorporates all the different biometrics that we store. This is also placed onto the Web4. And then again, the VTE is your own database, also on Web4. So I think if somebody wants to know more about what we have, they can actually go to the GitHub and understand what the history of it and the security protocols that we follow on there.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely put those links in the show notes as well, because there's a lot of terms and useful resources that you've mentioned, David. So we'll definitely put those in so they're convenient. So anyone having questions as you're listening to this, please do look into the notes, like I said, and the links will be there. And David, the storage location, I think is the encrypted storage location, the VTE. So that is that residing on the individual's device? It sounds like it's maybe residing in a server somewhere. So is that correct? Is that encrypted with their biometrics and then stored in a server that you guys manage, or is that stored on the individual's device?
So the one part yes, server part yes on the person's device. So only they can access that changes and that obvious via the server. The one thing that we now working on is to make the VTE accessible for any person in, let's look at Africa, where there's no uh, um, let's say power, there's no real communication systems, but the smartphones and smart devices allows for that type of thing. So we can have a device that can be utilized by various individuals to access their VTE, and once they've closed it, nobody else can access it. So that's where we're going with that at the moment. So
Okay.
the storage facility obviously is server-based and on the device. The problem with the device, it might get stolen, but the nice thing is only you can open up the VPE.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of scale, the other thing I was thinking about, David, as you were talking there is um, obviously the volume of transactions and things that are happening now, the volume of identities online, either fraudulent or real, is immense. And when I go to conferences and you speak to large banks and financial institutions, and I'm not saying this is a good reason to not want to do it, but for them commercially to then go back and basically redo everyone's identity, verify it all again, start from scratch, is definitely an issue for them. But obviously, it causes them a lot of fraud as a consequence of that. So one thing I think about with your solution is scaling. If everyone has to go back to that starting point to get that level of security, it's probably worth doing. But obviously, how can you scale that? Like, how many kiosks, for example, are available today, and how do you think about the challenges of scaling up that solution just to get people onboarded in the first instance?
Yes, I agree with you. They've already onboarded people, and most of these have been using this selfie solution. I know that a lot of people, and I'm actually sitting on a panel discussing selfie solutions, and um, there's a huge worry between amongst people regarding this because obviously, as we discussed earlier, deep fakes and all that. Um, so scaling of this is that you only need to onboard onto the Dell system once. You don't have to onboard at different places. So if you've onboarded at Bank A, you can utilize it at Bank C, investment that, hospital, all of it. So with our scalability part, we are looking mostly, and this is one of our core markets, is the healthcare sector. Because everybody basically does go to a hospital once in his life or her life. And because of the level that we can achieve at the hospitals and the clinics and that is that we can include DNA because I know that we're the only company that actually links fingerprints and DNA to each other apart from some police systems and all that. So the upscaling with the kiosks is easy. We've got three different types of kiosks. One's a wall-mounted one is a desk-mounted one, and one's a mobile one. So going to the desktop one, it's smaller and can be used by HR or in any institution. It takes about 90 seconds to onboard a person. So you've made them one time 90 seconds effort and your identity is protected, it can't be defrauded, and the institution that is using our system knows that that identity is that of a real world human being. If they try to defraud them, there's forensic evidence that we have that they did this or did not do this. Another part is that if I onboard as you onto this system and you onboard for 5 months or a year later, everything that I've done against you or against companies in your name will be held against me, and you will be cleared of anything that happened. Another part that's very important to understand is we've created a Dell Identity Trio. It's the human being that's alive. From there, we create a single digital twin. So you only have one digital entity from that identity. And then the third part of the trio is the deceased identity. So we can collect data of a deceased identity, match it against the real world human being that was alive using forensics, fingerprints, DNA, whatever extra, and add any extra or external markings, broken legs, whatever. And then we can actually add isotopes, which is nice for the parts where people are migrating to different countries, and the boat sank, and you find this lot of bodies. So we can actually then get the identity of that deceased identity with the isotopes and everything, and have an idea as to from where that person came, what area globally. So all of that has been incorporated into this, which makes it a very powerful system, but also very usable for everybody else. So it's basically for the life identity, the 3 different methods of capturing or different units, and then obviously the deceased we can also incorporate.
Yeah, interesting. And just in terms of the number of those 3 different types of kiosks, like how many are in circulation or how many are being used just now, David? Do you have numbers on those?
Not, I haven't got the numbers on that. I know that the mobile units has just now been deployed. We actually just
Got it.
finished it right now, and it's going into Africa. So we don't know
Okay.
how many of that. So, but the kiosks mostly it's being used where they actually verify the person's identity using the iris, and then another part that we have is a liveness detection and other parts that I can't discuss regarding the pupilometer at the moment, but it forms part of that as well.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know we're kind of getting close to time, so I probably need to kind of get close to wrap things up. But like, it's really been a fascinating discussion. Maybe we could conclude on one final question, David. What are your priorities, or what are DAL's priorities for 2024? It sounds like you guys are kind of starting to commercialize now with some of the units going out into production and going out into the field. What are your priorities for the coming year?
Well, firstly, we want to make a lot of people aware of what identity management using biometrics is. That's the one thing that's important. Our drive is basically to provide a tool to prevent human trafficking, terrorism funding, money laundering, and to obviously nullify synthetic identities. Um, the space in which we are, obviously, we're looking into as I mentioned, the healthcare sector. Um, any sector or any institution that requires the 100% verification of an identity to mitigate 100% any losses or prevention against any crimes that could be facilitated. Those are the institutions we're talking to. We're busy with mines at the moment because we know that there's huge problems in the mining area, not just with identity, but also where that person is underground. So we've got the metaverse that we actually created for any mine. And we can then in real time see where a person is. So it's basically a lot of education, one, and looking into the healthcare mining sector, and anyway, that's what our focus is for this year.
Fantastic. It's gonna be a busy year for you, David. But listen, really appreciate you making the time to speak to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I learned a huge amount about identity in the world of forensics. So thanks again for making the time, and hopefully we'll run into each other at a conference in the very near future. But David Jacobs, thank you for joining us on Identity 3.
Thank you very much for your time as well. I really appreciate it. It was a great pleasure.